My name is Danielle Barnes. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to our Speaker Stories event. I think I recognize everyone here, so I will save you my introduction to Women Talk Design because I know that you all are quite familiar with our work. But we're really excited to have you at today's event. Our Speaker Stories is a really special one that we were able to start when all of our programming moved online, because we have speakers from around the world, and we love being able to hear their journeys and their stories, because everyone has such a different path to public speaking, different topics that they speak on, a different background they come in with, different ways of getting into speaking, places that they speak at. And so it's been really fun about once a month to hold these events and be able to talk to a speaker and learn more about their experience of public speaking and the advice they've picked up along the way. Very excited about today's speaker, and we're going to have Frances introduce her in just a second. So quick kind of introduction to the format. If this is your first time here, Frances will start off with the kind of conversation with Kat. We'll have lots of time for Q&A, so please have your questions in mind. And then we hope you'll stick around for the last few minutes of the event. We love to do breakout rooms to give you a chance to chat with one another. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our operations lead, Frances, to kick off the conversation and introduce our speaker.
All right. Hello. Hi. Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to have you all here. I'm excited to talk to our featured speaker, who is Zhou. And Kat is the creator of the Design Ethically project, which explores how product teams can implement ethical practices in their day-to-day process. She is currently as you saw in our feed in the chat, she's currently based in Stockholm, Sweden, which is pretty awesome. I've heard lots of wonderful things about Sweden. She's been working in Sweden in tech as a senior product designer. Kat is also a master's student at the University of Cambridge, researching AI ethics with the, and I hope I don't mess this up, Leverhulme Center for the Future of Intelligence. Her work with Design Ethically has taken her around the world. She's presented at the EU Parliament in 2022, the US Federal Trade Commission, and the World Wide Web Foundation as an expert on design ethics in tech industry. She also spoke at conferences such as the UX conference in London, CPDP in Brussels, from business to buttons in Stockholm, Front conference in Zurich. Wow, she's got just an incredible resume and has had such an awesome just range of speaking quite literally all over the world, which is amazing. And I can't wait to talk to her and just hear about your experiences, Kat. So if you all would just join me in welcoming Kat to speak with us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me here, both of you, and for the lovely introduction. I've been following Women Talk Design for a very long time, and it's so cool to see the community grow and proliferate.
Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and dive right in and get started, Kat. So first things first, this is the question we all ask ourselves, especially when we start getting ready for a talk. Why do you speak?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for me, I speak because largely because I'm angry and there's a lot of important things to speak about, and there's a lot of problems that we have to bring to light. And so for me, over the last few years that I've been on the speaking circuit in the UX industry, a lot of it's been just highlighting, raising awareness of issues that we have, systemic fundamental issues that we have either in tech or broadly beyond that, that we want to just focus on and direct our energy towards. So that's why I speak. And I largely talk about design ethics and tech ethics. And it matters a lot to me because it impacts all of us, from, our day-to-day jobs to our loved ones that are using the products that we make.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. And you have design ethically, and that you speak about design ethics specifically. Is there another topic that you feel just as passionate about, or something that you're even working on that you are really like passionate about right now beyond design ethics?
Yeah.
What's been like has jumped out at you?
Yeah, definitely. So for me, when I started out talking about design ethics, it was largely looking at the processes of what we as designers can do to intervene in how we design our products and tech, and to focus more on making ethical products rather than harmful ones. Nowadays, I'm talking a lot about deceptive design patterns, which is raising a lot of awareness within the policy sphere as well. Legislators in the US as well as parliament members in the EU are starting to pay more attention at the kinds of manipulative and deceptive designs that a lot of companies employ. And a lot of designers have, either played a part in, or whether they intend to or not. So we're talking a lot about that. And then things that I also care about are just representation in the tech industry, and what it means to, to be inclusive. While I was at Spotify, some of the work that I was working on was featured in our like Building for Equity course. And this is something that I think is really important, of how can we increase representation, and do it in a way that's not just like face value, but actually meaningful, and actually impactful.
Absolutely, absolutely. I like that you said like not just on the surface, but impactful representation, because it's true. There's a lot of companies, and I've had that experience in other companies and things, where you say all the right words, you say all the right things, and it sounds wonderful, but really truly making that difference and really seeing that change be made, and making an impact on the product that you're putting out, but also for those that are working behind the scenes on that. So that's, I love that you are so passionate about that and a part of that kind of work. It's awesome.
Yeah, spot on. And I think our industry, we've nailed down the performative aspect of that. And we just need to actually like put our money where our mouths are.
It's very true. It's very true. Changing gears a little bit, I'd love to hear, you have such an extensive and rich resume of speaking, and so much experience speaking all over, and with all of these really big audiences, and pretty like high caliber audiences, if you will. And I would love to hear, what was your first speaking engagement like? Where was it? What was the first speaking engagement you had? How did you get it? And what was that experience like for you?
Yeah. So informally, my very first one was in 5th grade in our musical of the year. It was like I was the Wicked Witch of the West in The Wizard of Oz. And I got it because of my laugh. I was able to pull off the cackle. So that's how they cast me. And that was like one of my favorite experiences. And then I ended up doing speech and debate in high school. So I did a lot more speaking than I was one of those nerdy kids in that group. And I think it taught me so much, just having to put yourself out there on the weekends at these, really long and intense debate tournaments and whatnot. And it taught me how to be okay with making a fool of myself, at least embarrassing myself and getting over that hump, because you're just doing it all over and all the time. I mean, and so that was probably my first, like the formative years of learning how to speak in public. And I was really grateful for that, because I actually mostly did it for my friends, because my friends were involved. And then I ended up learning how to get out of my shell in that way. My first design speaking engagement was when I was in uni, and my college had design conference that they were hosting at the time. And so I gave like a really quick, I think it was a sketch class back when people used Sketch. And I did a little tutorial, and I remember I was kind of nervous because I had to not only speak, but also like do something on Sketch, like do some prototypes and mock-ups there. And I was more nervous about that part because Sketch was not the most, it was not as user-friendly as Figma is at the time. So that was my first design one. And it was quite something.
That's awesome. I love that you started speaking publicly in 5th grade. Like it's in your blood. Like this is a lot of, that's really impressive. That's very, very cool. I would love to know, like, how do you find, you have all these speaking engagements and you obviously speak quite often. How do you find your speaking engagements? Do you search them out? Do people come to you? Is it a mixture of both? And how do you decide to say yes and when to say no?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So in the beginning, it was, me applying to stuff. Like for example, when I spoke at South by Southwest, I went through their like formal application process to do like a workshop. And I think at the time they asked you to like send in your pitch and also send in like a video of you talking for a minute. And then there were a couple other conferences that I reached out to back then. Nowadays, it's for the past like 2 years, it's been people reaching out to me either through Twitter or LinkedIn or through my website. And then they'll send me, here's a conference that we're having. We'd love to have you. And then we typically have a chat and learn more about, what the conference is like, who else is speaking there. Compensation is also something that's really important, and like the theme that they're going for. And that's typically what I'm looking for. And then when it comes to some more like government policy speaking events, those typically like they're not necessarily paid. So I'm looking at more of like, what's the purpose of this? What kind of topic are they going for? Are they trying to learn more about something so that they can, regulate it later down the line, etc.
Very cool. Very cool. I like that you the way that you look at talks that are maybe not paid, that you're looking at it in a way of like, okay, well, what is the information we're giving out to people and what is it that I would be speaking on? Do you at all ever look at like kind of, some people will do a little bit of a barter system, whereas, okay, if there's no honorarium, is there like, something else that can be kind of bartered, whether it be like being promoted on their website or what have you? Do you ever do that? Did you do that earlier in your career?
I think earlier in my career, I think I was a little bit late to learning about how to ask for, what I deserved. And I think nowadays there's so many great resources on like, how do you ask for compensation? How do you do that? And I know Women Talk Design also has a lot of good content on that. In terms of nowadays, for me, what I think is important is that if I'm doing like a conference that's a for-profit conference that they're making money off of the tickets and the tickets are like $800 or something, then I definitely have my compensation expectations. When it comes to certain like speaking events that are either for, policy, it's like for a government or something, or if it's for like a nonprofit, something that's, or like a, a volunteer kind of situation, then I'm more open to doing pro bono events, because if the community, is something that matters to me, or if it is for like a policy event that matters for me, and those are never paid. So that's something that I will make exceptions for.
Well, nice. So now you've spoken at places like European Parliament, U.S. Federal Trade Commission, nothing to sneeze at there. That's very, very cool. What was those experiences like? I mean, you're speaking to these big government entities and these huge companies. What's that like?
It's definitely, it's fascinating because it's also in such a different sphere from what I was used to, at least. Um, I didn't really do much in policy or, public spaces. And so I've mostly been in tech this whole time. And when you're in, you know, events like an EU Parliament hearing or the US Federal Trade Commission, you're surrounded by other policymakers, lawyers, etc. And they're speaking typically from a completely different angle. And so in those two particular events, I was representing industry and design. And it was in some ways intimidating to be in a group of like lawmakers and policy folks talking a lot of legalese and stuff that just kind of went over my head. But it was really cool too, because I think, I was bringing in a new perspective, and it was cool to have these worlds merge. Because I think especially as we're talking about design ethics and tech ethics, we need to bring together all of these different folks that are in tech and design and academia as well, and policy. And so I think that was a really fascinating time, like place to be, just at that cool intersection of, worlds colliding. And in terms of those events, the two events that I was at, they're very like strictly time boxed, and they were like, here's a very strict itinerary that we have. You've got this many minutes to talk about this many things, and send us your slides beforehand. So it was a lot more, organized in some ways than a typical tech conference is. And so, there's like a lot of questions that they'll ask you from either members of parliament, et cetera. And you get those questions in advance, and you kind of think through that. It's interesting because I think also when I'm speaking in a place like that, I'm thinking of the overall goal of it. And so for the European Parliament talk, or the hearing, it was hearing to learn more about deceptive designs so that they could later on regulate it in their Digital Services Act. So for me, that was super exciting because, finally it was like this huge government entity that is looking at these manipulative designs and thinking about how can we regulate them better and make sure that they're not going to be harming future users. So it was an honor to play a part in like shaping that kind of legislation and trying to inform them how the tech world operates, and how, designers perhaps might operate, and, what drives us and what drives companies to act in the ways they do.
Wow, yeah, that's really powerful. That's pretty amazing to be able to have a part in educating big governments like this. I mean, even the US government, that we all know there's a little bit of education when it comes to tech that is needed, and to have somebody be able to speak and to have the honors, just, it's pretty incredible. So as you're doing these talks, and I would imagine that probably the process adjusts depending on whether you're talking with a nonprofit or you're talking with the European Parliament. What is your process in developing talks and practicing for those speaking engagements?
Yeah. So I typically, start off with who's my audience, who's listening, what kind of story do I want to tell them? And I start from their perspective of what they might expect to learn, or what they might hope to learn coming to my talk. And then that's how I build up from it. And I start from just like listing out the kind of questions that I want to address and the topics that I want to address. And I put them in like a logical order to kind of flow that storyline. And depending on how long or short the talks are, I'll make sure to either keep it really concise, or, sprinkle in a couple anecdotes here and there. And then the part that I really enjoy too is like designing the slides themselves. I think there's so much creativity that you can infuse into that and bring your slides to life. Of course, some places like they'll ask you to send your slides over before, and it'll have to be like a PDF form. So that's something that I've had to keep in mind. But when it comes to practicing my talks, I do the whole like talk in a mirror thing, where I can just sit in front of my mirror and I'll just talk and do my thing like 4, 5, 6 times over, in a sitting. And I think that's a really great way. I know when I was in speech and debate in high school before too, we'd do this thing where we'd film ourselves, which sounds kind of weird, but you'd stand and you'd give your talk while filming yourself. So you can see, what you look like, what you sound like. And it's always so cringy, but it's really helpful to kind of know, how do you carry yourself? And how do you gesture? And that's something that, like, when we were in speech and debate, we had to think about all of that, of like, where are you going to stand on stage, and where are you going to walk for each point and stuff. So even down to that kind of minutia. It's been easier during the pandemic when everything went online, because I would just sit and it was less thinking about the mechanics of that. But that's kind of the nitty gritty that I get into when I'm prepping for like an in-person talk.
Nice. So with all of your experience, I'd love to hear, has anything ever gone wrong? And I'm assuming with as many talks as you've done, probably. And how did you deal with that when something does go wrong?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, there's been everything from like, tech errors where like my mic would go off, or my mic has fallen before on the ground, or just like my own like brain farts where I forget something, or slip of the tongue or something. And I think for me, what's easiest to do is just to like laugh it off. I mean, we're all human at the end of the day. And I think partially because I've done so much stuff in like speech and debate in high school, like every embarrassing situation has already happened to me before when it comes to speaking. So I'm like, nothing can faze me now. I've already been there. So no, that it's like a helpful reminder for me. And I think it's just also when something goes wrong, or like, there's a mistake or something, it's important afterwards to just be forgiving of yourself. I think that's something that I've really, held on to, is just, don't be hard on yourself, forgive yourself, give yourself that grace and that the space to kind of grow and to learn from that stuff, or to just completely forget about it and repress it from your mind. And that's what helps you as well. So I think that's been super helpful.
That's awesome. Yeah, we're our own worst critic, right? We always are hardest on ourselves. So it's true, just giving yourself that grace that you would give to another person that maybe made the same mistake or had the same issue, what have you. So I love that. So you've done all of these talks. In doing these talks, how is that, having all this public speaking, how has that impacted your career? And do you have other speaking goals that you're really like, I would really like to speak with this group or be a part of this?
Yeah, I think for me, in terms of goals, I think I have such a fun time going to these events, and I think that's what I'm really on it for. Like, I just want to have fun, and the most important part and the most impactful part, I think, of public speaking on my career is just meeting people. Every time I go to a conference or an event, I meet people afterwards, either in person or online. And I think that community is so special. And you meet fellow speakers, you meet attendees, you meet just people that you never would encounter otherwise. And it's really awesome. And it's also been nice because I've been doing some events that are like multidisciplinary and attract multidisciplinary audiences. It's been cool to learn from other people. I think that's another huge part, is that what I'm learning from folks that are in academia or are in policy is just really eye-opening and special. So I think those are the biggest impacts for my career. I think also I've noticed, and kind of what I mentioned before, was that when I started out, it was a lot of me putting my name out there and just applying for things. But then there was a tipping point when, things started finding me. And I think what was helpful was that for some of those events, like the US Federal Trade Commission event, there was press there. People were writing about it. And that kind of also, got my name out in some ways. And so that was helpful, just to kind of expand my network and to get more opportunity in that sense.
Very cool, very cool. I have one more question, but I would love to take the time right now to open it up to our audience. And if you have a question, please feel free to pop it into the chat, or if you'd like to go off mute, and we can take some questions from the audience. Don't everyone go at once. While we're waiting for the audience, my last question is, what advice do you have for new speakers?
Yeah, I think for me, what is really helpful whenever I started out too is when you're prepping for a talk, um, doing it in front of friends or sometimes family might be a little too close, but in front of someone who is going to be kind to you and but also give you good feedback. I think that's really helpful. And then for me, I like to keep it not so intense and so formal. So for me, it's not always about like writing out a script and memorizing it, because I think that puts a lot of pressure on you to memorize something word for word. Rather, keeping it kind of conversational, but having certain, signposts in your mind. There's a lot of really cool like mental exercises that you can do. And I know there's one that we talked about in speech and debate way back when about like imagining that you're in a house and when you're giving the talk, you're in this house, and in each room of the house, you've got a topic that you're talking about, and you like visualize yourself going through the house as you're giving this talk. So you've associated the parts of your speech with certain visual sights in your mind. And I think that kind of helps as well. And people, there's a really trite advice about like imagining folks in their underwear. I typically don't do that because I think that's really distracting for myself. But, imagining just knowing that everyone is human and that everyone is, no one's out there to judge you. Because I think it sometimes does feel like everyone's like, oh my God, everyone's looking at me and it's so intense. But most of the time, people are not paying as much attention as you think they are, and they might be zoning out, especially if it's online. So you can totally be more chill on yourself in that way.
Love that. I love that idea of speaking about something from each room. That's such a great, for me, that like resonates. And I'm like, oh yeah, that like makes so much sense to visualize it that way. What a cool little tidbit there. Does anyone from the audience have any questions for our speaker, Kat? All right, so we have a question from Danielle. I imagine you have to present a lot at work too. How does presenting at work differ or is similar to presenting for an external audience?
Yeah, it definitely feels different for me. I find that I put a lot more attention into my external speaking, since I think at work it feels a lot more casual. Especially if you're just doing like a presentation for your team or something, as opposed to doing a more like high profile conference. There's definitely things that I think transfer across both. So I find that, a lot of the takeaways that I've had from how I structure my slides and the kind of design effort that I put into my visual slides sometimes does carry over to my work slides as well. And I've gotten, nice feedback on that. In terms of like when I'm speaking externally at other events, I think I typically try to dial up the storytelling and the overall like humor or engagement that I put into it, because it, for me at least, feels more of like a performance of like I'm on stage, as opposed to at work, you're just like in a meeting room with your colleagues, or either virtually or in person. So
Yeah, that's great. We have another question. This is from Valerie. Hi, Kat. Thank you so much for being here. Has speaking helped you gain new work as a designer with exciting companies and organizations?
Yeah, it has. It's definitely opened, new doors for me. in terms of just meeting new folks and people reaching out and asking like, would I be open to speaking for this and this and this. Recently, I was in the Netherlands because a company, like a design agency, was having an offsite and they wanted me to be their speaker for the offsite. So things like that have been popping up. There's definitely some, also like when you're speaking and when you're working in tech, you have to be mindful also about your company's rules on speaking externally too. And I think that's something is the other side of the coin. And so there's those considerations to make as well of, getting approvals for your talk and making sure that it's aligned with your company policy and stuff.
Very cool. Now that you brought that up, that just sparked a question for me of how do you actually navigate that? Because I'm sure that that's kind of new. I know for myself, and in times that I have, thought about speaking or what have you, I've not considered my company in press. I've never thought like, oh, I should check and make sure that it's okay that I'm speaking outside of the company. So I'd love to hear like, how do you navigate that? And if you have any like tips or advice for others.
Yeah, I will say that I completely relate to what you just said too in the beginning, especially for me. I was like, whatever. And to be honest, and I'm being completely frank right now, I think that to me, it feels very odd that companies would have such strict rules on employees speaking, especially if those employees are not talking about company IP, or perhaps like they're talking about completely unrelated topic. And for me, actually, one of the reasons why I left my last company was because they started kind of getting into my business of like tech ethics and design ethics when I wasn't even talking about my company's work and stuff. And I think that was a very eye-opening moment for me because it made me realize like maybe some of those policies are not necessarily right. I know some companies don't even let any of their employees speak at all, whether or not they're talking about the company stuff, or if they could be talking about climate change while they're working at a tech company. And that wouldn't be allowed, which I think is a bit questionable because fundamentally we're all like, multidimensional people. We're not just, a single dimensional tech worker, right? We're people that have different passions and different causes. So I think in the back of my head, that's something that is important that I remind myself of. And, definitely look into your company employee policies and what they have at work. And I think ultimately, if you do find a cause that you're like, this is something that's really important for me, I encourage you to speak anyway and see. Maybe it's one of those things where it's like ask for forgiveness not for permission. But especially if it is something important and there's a bit of resistance from your company, I think it's important to bring light to those issues anyway. And so that's my takeaway. It's not necessarily the most, I guess, safe when it comes to following the rules, but I think it's something that is important, especially if you're speaking about something that's a bit more, cutting edge and revolutionary or something. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That's really great insight. I appreciate you sharing that experience with us. I can ask a couple other questions. We will be going into breakout rooms in just a couple minutes. But I'd love to hear, we've got another question. That's what I was going to ask, if anyone else has any more questions. So Danielle asks, I'm curious if you've ever gotten any bad public speaking advice or something that didn't work for you.
Ooh, that's a good question. Let me think. I think sometimes just my parents, they might have encouraged me to focus more on like work as opposed to speaking. And this is something that like I'm so grateful for everything they've done for me, but it's not something that I necessarily agree with. I think speaking is such a great conduit for expanding opportunities beyond just your regular 9-to-5 employer. And I think that's something that has really opened my eyes to like there's so many different people you can meet and so many different connections that you can make beyond your company when you're speaking at events. So I think ultimately just look beyond your typical horizon and look at the big picture. In terms of other advice, I think going back to the whole like imagining everyone in their underpants thing, like sometimes that's not going to work for you, and there's other ways to kind of calm yourself down and make yourself feel more at ease. I think sometimes it helps when you're on a stage and everything is like pitch black in the audience. That also helps too, because it sometimes feels like you're not speaking to anybody. And then I think when it comes to online too, just being forgiving with yourself and knowing at the end of the day that it's all going to be okay, and you're just going to get it over with, and the event will be over before you know it.
That's really good. That's good advice. It's funny you mentioned the picturing people in their underwear. I've never really taken that ever seriously. I don't know if people ever do.
I'm like, how does that even work?
Right. I would imagine it would be quite distracting and not helpful in any way.
Exactly. And a lot of mental effort.
Right. So we're going to go into breakout rooms in just a moment, but if anyone else has any other questions, please feel free to put it in the chat. You can also use the raise your hand emoji if you'd rather not type it out. I totally understand that. I'm a slow typer. I get it. But yeah, so as we kind of start to wrap things up, we've got another one. So it says you mentioned calming your nerves. I'm curious if you have any pre or post talk rituals.
Oh, yeah. I have a lot of rituals. For me, before a talk, like I've gone to some conferences where I see speakers who are able to like mingle and go to other talks before their talk, and I don't know how they do it. I'm always amazed. My pre-talk ritual is that I lock myself in either a hotel room or in like a rehearsal room that they might have at the venue, and I am just like in there rehearsing. It's my own little thing. I just have to do it. I don't know how I can otherwise function. And then afterwards, that's when I can kind of like just completely relax and like, go to the happy hour, like hang out and actually meet people and stuff. So for me, I like to be earlier in the conference so I can, get it over with and then actually enjoy other people's talks, because otherwise before I am locked away, like in front of the mirror rehearsing.
That's awesome. I love that. Taking that moment to kind of center yourself and get focused and calm your nerves. I love that. That's a really smart way to like, sometimes you just need like all the noise to kind of go away and take a moment for yourself.
Everyone's different though. So I know like for me, I think some of my friends, when I tell them that I do that, they're like, that sounds wild. Like sounds like that's really stressful. And some people, they just need to be like in a completely different area to forget about it. But yeah, it's whatever floats your boat. Just know yourself. Like, yeah.
That's the key, is what's going to help you specifically. I like that. Thank you so much, Kat. This has been such a great conversation. I learned a ton, and I hope our audience as well took away a lot of really great just nuggets of wisdom and experience. We are going to go into breakout rooms and just get a chance to meet some of the people in the community that maybe you haven't met before. We also have some suggested questions. I know it can always be awkward when you get into a breakout room and everyone just kind of is like, hi, hi. So we've got a few questions for you to kind of get that conversation started and just get to know the Women Talk Design community, get to know one another. Thank you so much, everyone that came. Kat, I'm a little intimidated because unbelievably impressed by your speaking and everything, and just in all the things that you've done. Even the 5-year-old you, I'm like, man, she rocks. It's pretty awesome. So I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us and share your experience with us. It's been really, really great.
Thank you so much, Francis, for moderating. You're such a great host. And thanks, Danielle, for putting this all together.